Okay, so good afternoon, class. So I'm Princess Carolino, and I'm your online learning coordinator for your subject English 2112, Reading and Writing Skills. So for this discussion, for this lecture, we're going to discuss your week 2 lesson, which talks about paragraph development patterns. So we will discuss the first two, narration and description. So first is let us introduce what paragraph development patterns are. So you are now in senior high school, and I know that the common scenarios that you experience whenever you are asked to write an essay or any composition in school, you tend to use these practices just to say that you were able to write a long and a well-written paragraph or essay. So sometimes you use larger fonts. So if you were asked to write an essay, computerized essay, you tend to customize your fonts, the use of um, different kinds of fonts in the sizes, just uh, to have more words written in your paper. But then if you're gonna look at the content, it's not that well written because you just use larger fonts. What else? You increase the page margins, or you use repetitive words or information, or sometimes you use excessive quotes, wherein when you write and you use references, you tend to just copy and paste whatever information you were able to look for inside the internet. So you don't do summarizing, paraphrasing, or um, quoting, proper quotation of those informations. But then what do you do is that you just copy and paste all those information. So those are excessive quotations. But then you need to remember that those actions are to be improved. So in writing, we have a lot of paragraph development patterns that you may use, you may practice to improve your writing skills. So we have 10 paragraph development patterns in my reference, but in your module, I think there were only 8. So the two um, patterns left were from my references, but those 8 were in your module. So let's have those paragraph development patterns. First is narration. We have description, definition, classification. We have comparison and contrast, cause and effect, problem solution, and persuasion. So these two, exemplification and process analysis, will be bonus discussions on my end. So I'll be discussing this in the latter part of the subject. So we will focus on the first two, narration and description, and then the definition and the rest of the other patterns will be discussed with the other group in the succeeding days. So let's start with the first one, narration. So narration is, or a narrative. A narrative is a story. So this kind of paragraph can be an effective strategy to draw the reader's attention and in establishing your voice in the essay. So it requires the use of chronological ordering. So let's try to have this one first. Okay, so it uses action words, verbs, and adverbs to help the story to move along and make it more interesting. Let's define what narration is before we proceed with the examples. Another definition is that it uses transitional words and phrases to signal time and movement. And here, it uses transitions such as first, then, soon, after, and suddenly, and the rest of the other transitional words to maintain the coherence and the movement in your narrative or in your narration. Again, a narration is when you tell a story about something. So you can use this pattern in writing, whether it be in short stories, in writing novel, or writing other literary pieces, just like drama. And you can also use this in writing essays, news articles, especially, and speeches. So let's try to have this example. It says here, before the girls got to the porch, I heard their laughter crackling and popping like pine logs in a cooking stove. I suppose my lifelong paranoia was born in those cold molasses low minutes. They came finally to stand on the ground in front of Mama. At first, they pretended seriousness. Then, one of them wrapped her right arm in the crook of her left, pushed out her mouth and started to hum. I realized that she was aping my grandmother. Aping is imitating or copying the actions of the grandmother. So in this example, there are transitional words or signal words that shows the movement of the event. So we have here the word before. So this is the first event that happened in this scenario. Actually, this is an excerpt from I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. Okay, and then after the word before, the next thing happened is that they came. So we have the word finally. In Filipino, parang dumating din. And then we have another transitional word at first. So this is their action when they came. So they pretended seriousness. So they're not laughing, they're not smiling. And then another transitional word used is the word then. So this is the action happened after they pretended their seriousness. So that is how they use transitional words. So to further explain this, I have here um, a common example that I know you are familiar with. So if you are an aspiring journalist, an aspiring news writer, an aspiring broadcaster, and you are asked to write a write up about an event. So what do you do is you have to narrate the story to inform the your readers about what happened. So if you are going to tell a story, you don't start with the ending. You should start with the beginning of the story in order for them to get the context of the entire story. And then they would know how to understand what happened to the characters, if it's a story, or to the those people involved in that incident. So let's say, for example, the beginning of the story is this one. Nuesca barged into the residence of Gregorius. He was with his daughter. They exchanged words that intensifies the situation between the two parties. I know that you are familiar with this scenario because this is what we saw in that video clip uploaded in the social media related to this case, to this news. And then what happened next is that Nuesca grabbed Frank Gregorius' lower clothes, so his shorts. So his mother, so Frank's mother, rushed to protect her son. He hugged him tightly to resist Nuesca's aim to arrest him. And then another Gregorio came to help her mom and brother. So that's the ate. Nuesca's daughter suddenly pulled the hair of another Gregorio, which again triggers both parties for another intense argument. That's when the daughter barged into the scenario wherein yun nga yung sinabunutan niya yung ate. And then the end of the story is that Nuesca's daughters and Frank's mom had an argument. The exchange of words causes Noesca to aggressively pull the trigger of the gun. pointing to the two Gregorios. So that's when um, the daughter of Noesca has mentioned, my father is a policeman, and then the mom of Frank Gregorio answered, I don't care. Yeah, that statement, and then that triggers Noesca to shoot them using his gun. So after that, Noesca and his daughter left after shooting them. So if you are to write news about it, you don't start with the gunshot scenario, but you have to start with what happened first in order for your readers to understand it fully. Okay, so that's how you do narration. So you can apply this narration in writing story or in writing articles, whether your purpose is to inform or to persuade or to entertain your readers. As long as there is a story involved, there are characters, there are movements of events happen, you use narration. Okay, and then the next one is here, the narrative devices that you may use in writing a story. So usually we use this in writing novels. So if you are into reading Wattpad and pocket books and other books, you sometimes encounter this narrative devices, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with them or not. But here are those. Number one is flashback. So flashback is going back to an event happened in the past, or an event that has happened before the present event. So in my previous example, I used Noesca and Gregorius case. So we have here the present story. This was just released yesterday. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or if you were able to watch the news, but Noesca was released from the jail. The PNP claimed that there is lack of evidence or evidences for the murder case filed against the former police. So this is the present story now related to that case. This was just yesterday and it's all over the internet. I'm not sure if you were able to read about it. Okay, so this is the present story now. If we are to have a flashback of what happened in the past before this present story, so we will go back with the incident in December 2020, which was the shooting incident. So Novezka shoot a mother and son in Paniki, Tarlac. So the former police was charged for murder case. So what's the purpose of having flashbacks or going back with the previous event? This is to further enlighten your readers of the context of the present story. Another narrative device is foreshadowing or foreshadow. This is foreseeing possible events to happen in the future. So in terms of literary papers, literary works, foreshadowing is, or we can relate it usually with the plans or what do you call this? Plans and future actions to be taken by the character. So let's say, for example, your character in your novel is about to celebrate a birthday. So since the character knows that he or she is about to celebrate her birthday, so what are the possible actions that may happen in that day? Yon. And then for foreshadowing of my example. So this is just an anticipation. I'm not sure if this will happen, but again, it's foreshadowing possible event to happen. So I have here the families of the two victims will file a motion in the Court of Appeals after Noezka was released due to lack of evidences of the case. So based on my analysis, I'm not certain, but maybe the family of the Gregorius will file a motion for reconsideration. Maybe they are asking why did they release Noesca? So after discussions maybe with their lawyer, they will proceed with the file of motion in the Court of Appeals. We don't know, but again, as I've said, foreshadow is possible events to happen related to the story. And then the backstory, or also known as the background story. So these are story behind the present story. So I have here the background story of those two involved, Noesca and the Gregorios. So Noesca and the Gregorios had conflicts because of land issues. So if you're familiar with that, if you were able to scrutinize the case well during the time when it was aired in the media. So it was mentioned that they have land issues. Yung right of way daw ng Nuesca. And recently, an incident happened because of firing Boca. So that's the backstory, bakit sila binarel, and then why was Nuesca put into jail and why he was released now. And my foreshadow is the future action. I hope you are learning from this. And um, you may also apply this in writing, even if it's not a news article, as long as it tells a story. For instance, in your subject, creative writing and creative nonfiction, if you are a young student, you will have that subject by next year. I'm not sure if by next year, grade 12, yeah, you will have more of writing activities there. So we hope that everything will be back to normal so you could experience those activities. Yun. And then, so next one is the description. We're done with narration. Let's proceed with description. If you have questions related to narration, you may ask it in the chat box and then I'll try to answer them after my discussion. Okay, so number 2 or the second paragraph pattern that you may use is description. So it conveys how something sounds, smells, tastes, feels, and or looks. And using transitional words and phrases that indicate location are often recommended. So the details can be arranged in any pattern. It's up to you. And it's not about what the writer sees, but what the reader needs to see in order to imagine the scene, person, or the object. So in your part as writer, you need to use appropriate words to describe an object or your subject in that writing so that your readers would imagine the scenario or that person or object well so that also they could understand your write up. And on your part as the reader, you need to focus more on the descriptions in order for you to visualize those words or those scenarios that the writer wrote in that composition. So here is an example. The dearth of the girls' cotton dress continued on their legs, feet, arms, and faces to make them all of a piece. Their greasy uncolored hair hung down, uncombed, with a grim finality. I knelt to see them better, to remember them for all time. The tears that had slipped down my dress left unsurprising dark spots and made the front yard blurry and even more unreal. The world had taken a deep breath and was having doubts about continuing to revolve. So, um, as a reader, I'm pretty sure that you were able to imagine um, the physical look of that girl mentioned here. So it says that the dress is dirty and it the dirt continues to the feet, legs, arms, and faces. And also their hair are greasy and uncolored, and they were not able to comb it. In your understanding or in your visualization, what could they be? What could the girl be? Anyone from the chat box? Based on the description. Yeah, they are poor. Or maybe they are homeless. Very good. What else? Beggar, probably. Yeah. So, as you can see, upon reading the description of the character or the object or the subject in this write-up, you were able to visualize what the character looks like. So, that's with the physical appearance. So, there are types of description, two types of description that you may use in writing, and it applies to specific um, form of writing. So the first one is subjective description. So describes an impression of what is observed. Commonly, this is applied in fictional writing. For instance, you are writing a novel or a short story or a literary piece, you may use this subjective description. And this is based mostly on your observations and experiences as a writer. So, for example, it was a dark and lonely night. So, there is no specific characteristic of a lonely night, but it's up to the reader. How will they imagine that dark and lonely night? Maybe you can think of it as, night, midnight, or a silent and cold night in the province, or maybe uh, you are alone during that night. Yeah. So it just depends on your imagination or your experiences. But these are example of subjective descriptions. So you may use figurative language like um ano pa ba? Simile, something like that. Though figurative language and idioms. And then the other one is objective description. So these are present an impartial and actual picture of an object or scene. So these are the actual descriptions of an object. So in writing news report, the write-up descriptions must be reported objectively. So we cannot say that if we cannot describe them using figurative language, but with the actual wordings in physical state of the object. So, for instance, we have here my previous example. It was dark and lonely night. So, in objective description, you cannot say that because you are not writing a literary piece. You are writing a formal write-up. So, no, it was around 11 in the evening. So, probably it's really dark. No people are wandering around and the surrounding is very silent. That is why you feel like it's a lonely night. But this is the objective description. Okay, so for those who are writing news articles, uh, they cannot use flowery words to describe someone in their write-up. For instance, there happened a car accident, and then they cannot say yung term na dumanak ang dugo in Filipino. They cannot say that. If it's just a car accident, they cannot say yung dumanak ang dugo because dumanak ang dugo in Filipino means that there was a riot or a war with more people died. So the definition is very far from the scenario happened. Yun. So again, to summarize the two, subjective description is more on fictional writing. So you may use any descriptions that you want on this part. While in objective description, you need to be specific. You need to be direct on the actual description of something. So in sciences, especially in doing experiments, you need to state everything that happened directly, because that is a report. So you need to write a report about it. It needs to be exact. Yun. And then here another example. So Olino is a good example of a state park in Florida, surrounded by the tall, shaded woods of a beautiful hardwood forest. The Santa Fe River disappears in a large, slowly swirling tree-lined pool. Yan. So I don't know how you're going to imagine this one. Disappears in a large, slowly swirling tree-lined pool. And then the other one is here. We have the date and the actual data of what happened. So it was May 17, 2015, and Kuno, then 36, had been out of communication range since 13. So that's the description of what happened. So for this lecture, we will discuss the third paragraph development pattern, which is definition. Again, just a reminder, you can review or you can view my lecture inside the LMS. So once the video recording was posted. So let's proceed. We have here definition. So definition identifies a term and sets it apart from all other terms that may be related to it. So commonly, when you tend to write an essay or you were asked to write any composition in the academe or academics, what you usually do is that you define a term before you proceed with the rest of the other parts of your essay. And that is a good practice because definition or defining a term before you start discussing the parts in your essay will give your reader a hint or an idea of what your topic is all about. So it begins by citing the general class to which the term belongs. So it's an intensive definition when you define a term first by citing the general class. So in different contexts, there are classes of terms according to their uses in the discipline where it is used. For example, in science, we have biology. When we talk about animals, there are classes of animals. So we have the different kingdoms of animals. We have the mammals. So those are general classes. Mammals, amphibians, we have the reptiles, and even the other forms of living organisms. So that's in biology. So there are general classes to where those terms belongs. So after citing the general class, you may follow it by the particular description or terms to differentiate the term from other members of that class, providing them clear details to support the terms of definition. So for example, we have here this one. So it says here the viola is a stringed instrument in the violin family. It is only slightly larger than the violin and is tuned at a lower pitch. Like its smaller relative, the viola is held on the shoulder under the chin and is played with a bow. While the violin has many uses, the viola is used mainly in orchestral and chamber music. So with this example, the bolded words are the general class and it is followed by the classifications which differentiates it to its general class or family. So again, the first term we have here is it is a string instrument in the violin family. So you already know, you would already visualize what a violin is. And then it says here, is slightly larger than the violin. So obviously it's not with the same size with the violin, and um, it is tuned at a lower pitch. So it has a very clear differentiation with violin and the viola. So that's how you do it. And there are different methods of defining a term. We will discuss them later on. So if you were able to read your modules, it were stated there. Those are all stated there, but I have added some from my reference. So definition, the writer's goal is to help the readers to understand new terms or concepts, or to come to new understanding of terms. So again, when you write essays, usually you start it with the definition of your topic. For instance, if you were asked to write about global warming, I'm pretty sure that the first thing you do is that you search for the word global warming in the internet. And then the meaning or the definition that will come out, that will be generated out of your searching practices. So those were the definitions that you tend to write in the beginning of your essay. Yan. And then there we have it. So the methods or the common methods we use in writing a definition of a term. So number one is by denotation. If you're familiar with the term denotation and connotation. So let's have first denotation. So this is the use of formal meaning of a term from a reference or dictionary. Or we have the Webster, we have the use of encyclopedia, we have the use of other dictionaries, thesaurus, something like that. Okay, so when you get the actual or the formal meaning of a term from a reference like dictionary, you are using it or you are writing it by denotation. So for example, I searched the meaning of dictionary, and this is the formal meaning of the term or the denotation of dictionary. So a book or electronic resource that lists the words of a language, so typically in alphabetical order, and gives their meaning or gives the equivalent words in a different language, often also providing information about pronunciation, origin, and usage. So this definition is from the Oxford Languages. So I use Google to look for this definition. So if you're going to write an essay and you are going to use a meaning from a reference, that is denotation. Okay lang yon kung gagamit kayo ng ganun, as long as you tend to define a term. Okay, and then the next one is connotation. So the definition that relies on the author's perspective and experiences. So sometimes if we are lack of references or resources, we tend to write something or we want to define something out of our own knowledge. And that is not bad. That is not a negative practice, because we have our own styles and strategies when it comes to writing. So we can still use words or definitions which are based on our own knowledge or understanding or perspective or experiences. Sometimes we also use or we also define terms according to its use in our paper. So for instance, in writing a research, we have the so-called technical term or technical definition in operational definition. The operational definition there is how you were able to use that term in that research paper. So example is the word participants. So if you are going to look for the definition from the dictionary, we have the meaning a person who takes part in something. But if I'm going to write something about Zoom and I will use the term participants, I'm actually pertaining to the attendees in the Zoom meeting because you are called participants. So that is based on author experience. That is how you do connotation. Okay, next is the third one is by defining by characteristics or features. Usually this is applied in defining scientific terms. So it typically relies on, or we usually define a term by its physical feature. So let's say, for example, an animal. If you're going to describe an animal, you can say that a dog is a kind of mammal with 4 feet, 2 eyes, 2 ears, it barks, and it bites. So that is a connotation, but then I'm defining the dog by its physical features and behaviors. So there you have it. Physical features as well as behaviors may be part of this type of definition. So based on your observations of the physical appearance of something, so you can also define them or the object or the subject by that. Okay, the third one is by function. Usually this is used in defining processes or scientific processes which occurs in the environment or something like an experiment, So defines a term as to how it works or what it does. In some writings, these definitions are important, especially if you are going to write a formal writing related to science. Lalo pag experiment. Yes. So, an example would be photosynthesis is the process by which green plants and certain other organisms transform light energy into chemical energy. So actually, this is the real process or the changes or what do you call this? The actual happenings when photosynthesis occurs. So you can use this as definition. Again, in defining terms, you can use this method, defining the term by its function. So what are the other terms that we can define by functions? So we have chemical reactions, something like that. Ano ba yung tawag dun sa ano? Kapag a solid will transform into liquid like yung ice, yun evaporation, mga ganun, condensation. If you're going to define those terms, you can use this method, defining by function, in order for your readers to understand more of that term, that evaporation, condensation, mechanical reaction, mga ganyan. Usually science related pag defining by function. Okay, and then number are we now? I think this is number 4. So writing a definition by what it is not or by contrasting or using antonyms of words. So this is a defining technique by giving the reader a hint of what is different between terms and what it is not and what it is lacking. So I used a very simple example here, the term give. So what is the antonym or what is the opposite of giving? Obviously, it's receiving. So you can also use other antonyms like we have here, accept and take, wherein receive, accept, and take are magkakaparehas yan, but they are all the opposite of give. So that's how you define by contrast or antonyms. If you're going to give them the difference or the antonym of a term, maybe your readers might be able to understand it if they are familiar with the antonym. If they are more familiar with receiving and they don't know how to give, you can explain it to them by using the antonym. Okay, next is defining by what is similar to, or comparison, or the use of synonym. So analogies can also be used, so it helps us understand unfamiliar concepts by associating them to their likes. You know, analogy, so you are using example, or parang nilalapat nyo yung term to another example. So for instance, we have the term parasitism. So the practice of living as a parasite in or on another organism. So if I'm pertaining to bacteria, I will use this as a definition. So organism kasi bacteria. But if I want a child, or for instance a junior or an elementary student to understand what parasitism is, I can use an analogy of a social relationship, because that is, I know na mas maiintindihan nila because they are into living with it, the social relationship. So where one depends on the other. So I may use an example of them and their parents. So, 'di ba nakatira ang anak sa bahay with their parent, and their parents are the one providing for their needs, especially for materials like shelter, clothes, food, and their needs and their wants. So I could explain it to them that while their parents are providing for their needs, yeah, their money is decreasing, or the monetary fund is decreasing. Siyempre, pag gusto ng anak na bumili ng laruan, mababawasan yung pera nilang para sa pagkain. So the child there is dependent on their parent. So, yun. So, that's parasitism. Pwede ko siyang gamitin as example. That is an analogy. And the next method will be almost similar to analogy, but this one is an example. So giving an illustration of the term can also be an effective technique to define a term. So this one is not on giving an analogy, but the actual example of the term. So going back with parasitism, yan, I use the term or the analogy social relationship as the like of what parasitism is. But if I'm going to give an example, I would prefer to use the actual parasite, which is lice or kuto. So if I'm going to explain this to a young child, sabihin ko, parasitism is when one lives in another organism for benefit, just like your lice living in your head, because they are sucking your blood. So they are benefiting from that practice of sucking your blood while you are suffering kasi nangangati yung ulo mo. So that is example of parasitism. And I'm sure maiintindihan naman siya ng bata because I'm using now the actual example. And the next is by its origin or etymology. Again, if you have questions, you may drop your questions in the chat box and then we will answer them later on. Baka naguguluhan kayo, ganyan. You may ask them. Okay, next is by its origin or etymology. So defining a term, providing the history. So exploring the evolution of the term could yield interesting insight into the connotation of the contemporary term. I'm not sure if you were able to encounter such. Now, wherein when you look for a definition using Google, there were sometimes definitions or terms which are from Greek, the Latin, and how the word evolved from that original term hanggang sa term that we are using now. So, for instance, the term philosophy. So we have here, it came from the Greek roots philo and sophos. So the term philosophy is from philosophos, which means love for wisdom. And that is the term or the definition that we are using now in defining philosophy. If you're familiar with that. Ganon. So if you want to try it, you can use other forms of dictionaries to look for etymology. One good thing that an etymology can serve you is that sometimes the context can be found from the root word, kung anong root word man yan, if it's a Greek or Latin or Roman, ganyan. Minsan nandun yung pinaka-meaning niya sa root, sa pinanggalingan. Because, language is dynamic and it evolves from time to time. So, minsan, iba na yung meaning niya to what we want to meant by now in the contemporary times. But then the context is, nandun siya talaga sa una. So, if you wish to explore more of a word, you look for its history, the etymology, the origin. Saan siya nanggaling, kailan siya ginamit, how did they use it, who coined the term, sinong gumamit ng term na yon. We have those in, lalo na sa philosophy, social sciences, humanities, and social sciences related terms. Commonly ganun eh. They provide the person who coined the term. Yun. And then, a note for everyone. So, in defining scientific terms, the writer should be objective as possible as the terminologies are extensive and discipline specific. So, usually, it applies not only to science but to other fields or disciplines like business, education, and other fields. I was not able to discuss this in your EAPP. So we did not have more of virtual classes, but it highlights or it explains that in the using terminologies or words in English or in writing or in speaking using English, there are specific terms to be used lang in one discipline. Like if you are going to use this term, dito lang siya sa field na to. And if you are going to apply it in different term, you need to provide more explanation of it para ma-apply dun sa term nyo. What do I mean by this? For instance, you are a doctor. Mga STEM students dyan. So, there are some terms that are applied in medicine na pang medicine lang. Yung X-ray, yung RNA, DNA, yan. Pag define mo yun, you need to be more specific kasi scientific terms yun. Similar to business, if you are an ABM student, if you mention the term account can be applied in different aspect. So we have, in terms of social media, you have your account, but what is account in business? Pwedeng bank account, ganyan. So, ano siya, kailangan nagiging specific. So, objective definitions ang kailangan. And in humanities, definitions can be more subjective. So, a writer can define complex terms such as heartache, luck, and democracy in a personal way. So, it depends on your understanding and experiences. But then when it comes to the use of definition, yun nga, sabi ko, we have discussed, I think around 7 or 8 methods in defining. You can apply those. And If you are writing a literary piece naman, it is not necessary to use definition. You can use figurative language, you can use idioms to write or to describe and not to define. Yun. So parang when we talk about patterns in paragraph development, we have specific uses. We have specific forms to where we apply those patterns. Ganun. So the first one that I mentioned kanina in the previous discussion with group 3, narration can be used in writing stories. Pwede siya to literary works, fictional works. Description can also be used in fictional writings, both in fictional and non-fictional writings. But this one, the definition, can be used more of um, formal writing. Yun. So that's it. That is where our presentation ends.